Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the first Friday lecture for the month of February. Today's speaker is Katia Mitova and her title is The Death and Rebirth of Virgil. Please note that this presentation is also being recorded and it will be available on the Graham School Student Community website on Canvas next week at some point if you want to watch it later. Also, please be aware that you will not be able to unmute your microphones during this presentation as a courtesy to our speaker. You will be able to ask questions of the speaker by typing them into the chat box. And you can do this at any time during the presentation. Questions that you type into the chat box, I will keep track of, and I will pose them to Katia at the end of the lecture during the question and answer period. During the presentation itself, as I say, you will all be muted. We all will, besides Katia, except, and Katia and I will be able to see your video, but we won't be able to hear you. So if you leave your video on or turn it off, it is at your discretion. Katia's video will be spotlighted for the most part during the presentation. Consequently, the best way to view the lecture is to select speaker view instead of gallery view. Today's lecture is being sponsored by the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults at the University of Chicago's Graham School. My name is Kendall Sharp, and I am the Cyril O'Hoole Chair of the Basic Program. Before I properly introduce our speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the Basic Program, the Graham School, and our upcoming courses and events. The Basic Program is a 4-year certificate program at the University of Chicago Graham School of Continuing Studies. Since 1946, we have offered our students a rigorous liberal arts curriculum based on the principle that there's no substitute for direct engagement with big ideas in their original texts. Through focused discussion, our classes provide direct encounters with some of the great works of classical and Western culture in a dedicated community of adult learners led by experienced University of Chicago educated instructors. Due to the current crisis, all of our classes take place remotely. There is still just enough time to register. Oh, sorry about that. I must say, there's a, sorry. The Graham School of Continuing Studies traces its origins to the founding of the university. Presently, Graham houses and nurtures programs other than the basic program. Our flagship 4-credit program is the Master of Liberal Arts. For more non-credit offerings, there is the Open Enrollment Program. And we also have programs that run on an annual basis, such as Know Your Chicago and our great travel program, a fortnight in Oxford, newly supplemented this year by a Senite in Oxford. Next month, on March 3 at noon, will be an installment of the series called Conversations at Graham. This one featuring basic program instructor, Christopher Lynch. Chris will be discussing what he calls the 2 Machiavellis. The event will serve to showcase Chris's upcoming course in the spring term called The 2 Machiavellis. Also next month, the first Friday lecture will happen on March 4, and the speaker will be basic program instructor Claire Pearson. Claire's title will be Evolution and Politics, a close look at Rousseau. You can find more information and register for future First Friday lectures and all other events on our website. Let me pause to mention that today's lecture previews a novel Katia will be teaching in a course this spring quarter, an in-person course actually, downtown at the Bleacher Center. As I mentioned before, this presentation is being recorded. The recording will be available to current and former students on the Graham School community website early next week. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Katia Mitova has been teaching in the basic program since 1998. She holds an MA in Comparative Slavic Studies from the University of Sofia, Bulgaria, and an MA and PhD from the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago. In her native city of Sofia, she worked as an assistant professor of Slavic literatures, editor of Panorama, the national quarterly magazine for literature and political philosophy, and daily correspondent for Radio Free Europe. She has published 2 books of poetry, The Human Shell in Bulgarian, and Dream Diary, which was published in 2013. the latter in English. She has translated into Bulgarian and edited about a dozen books of fiction, poetry, and philosophy. She taught philosophy and literature in the college at the University of Chicago. Her research and teaching interests include storytelling, as well as the relationship between ethics and aesthetics. Katia Mitova is the 2008 recipient of the Graham School's Excellence in Teaching Award for the basic program. Now, it is my pleasure to turn things over to Katia, whom I shall spotlight. Katia.
Thank you, Kendall. I am going to share with you my PowerPoint. Okay, the title is The Death and Rebirth of Virgil. The Death of Virgil is the book that I will talk about eventually today, but I'm hoping that with your help as an audience, I will help Virgil be born again for us today. The lecture will focus not only on the Death of Virgil by Hermann Broch, but first on Virgil's Aeneid. I know there were some announcements that only had the second part of my description, which was about Broch's book, but in order to arrive there, I'm going to talk about Virgil first. Another thing I wanted to mention is a big thank you to two translators. And one is Shari Barch, her new translation of the Aeneid, which we are using in our current Aeneid classes, and to a woman who is not around any longer, who translated the Death of Virgil, and her name is Jane Starr Untermeyer. And if you have read the book or you ever read it, you will see that this is quite a feat. Without these two translations, we are not going to have the same access to the two books I'm going to talk about. Okay, I'm going to proceed to a picture that many of you might have seen in the Art Institute of Chicago. You see, this is a very colorful representation of Virgil in gold reading parts of the Aeneid to Augustus in red, his sister who has fainted, and his wife Livia. Octavia is the sister, Livia is behind her. As you see, this is very dramatic, but actually the only truthful thing might be the role, the script in the hands of Virgil. Everything else is a kind of fantasy, because anecdotally we know that Virgil read books 2, 4, and 6 to Augustus, but we don't know for sure whether this was true. In any case, these 3 books of the Aeneid have become the famous parts of the Aeneid, and it makes sense to perpetuate it through art. In any case, also, it might be an anecdote. So, I'm starting with a comparison between the poet and the politician, and I will focus on this relationship between the poet, in this case Virgil, and the politician Augustus. Here I have juxtaposed several dates in their lives with important events so that we could compare two careers, if you wish, 2 occupations, 2 careers. So Virgil works on his Eclogues, which is a very short work, very influential, but only 800 lines, from 45 until 37 before the current era. Then, while he's working on this, Julius Caesar in 44 is assassinated, and Octavian becomes his heir. Then Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus start the second triumvirate. Then Julius Caesar is named Divus Julius, divine Julius, And this allows Octavian to become divine son of, of Caesar. Then we have the Treaty of Brindisium in the year 40, which divides the Roman world as it exists at the moment. The whole Mediterranean is kind of included into 3 areas. And of these, Mark Antony has the East, Lepidus has Africa, and Octavian has the West. Everybody recruits soldiers in the Italian peninsula. In 38, a year before Vergil has finished his 800 lines, Octavian becomes Imperator Caesar. Imperator meant really commander, victorious commander. Later it becomes an emperor of an empire. So while Vergil was working on one relatively short work of poetry, Octavian accomplished a lot, considering that he started at the age of 19 when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Then Vergil works on the Georgics. The Georgics are a longer work, about 2,100 lines, and you see from 36 until 29, 7 years, he works on this one work, which is about agriculture. It is giving much value to the role of the farmer in the Roman world. In the meantime, Octavian defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Then in 29, Vergil starts working on the Aeneid, again anecdotally sponsored or encouraged in some way by Octavian. In 27, Octavian becomes Imperator Caesar Augustus, and in 19, when Vergil dies, Augustus continues to rule single-handedly the whole Roman world, and he becomes Pontifex Maximus, high priest, and then finally, in the second year before the current era, Augustus becomes Pater Patriae, which means the father of the fatherland, really. So I wanted to juxtapose these 2 careers because a big emphasis of my presentation would be on the difference of the task of the politician and the task of the poet. Sorry. Okay, the politician's task first. Maybe it will be helpful to look at what Vergil says through Anchises to Aeneas in the underworld. This is a very programmatic statement. You, Roman, remember your own arts, to rule the world with law, impose your ways on peace, grant the conquered clemency, and crush the proud in war. Now, this is one formulation of what Octavian will be doing after he has conquered everybody else and is single-handedly ruling the whole empire. But there is also something else here, a very interesting simile that is unusual. It appears in the first book of the Aeneid, and it reads like this: just as riots often fester in great crowds, when the common mob goes mad, rocks and firebrands fly, their fury provides weapons, but if they see a man of weight in piety and service, they hush and wait to hear him. He guides their minds and soothes their hearts with words. Just so, all the tumult of the sea died down once Neptune scanned the waters. He turned his steam and let them run free under cloudless skies. So that's the other more individual characteristic of the leader, of the politician, a man of weight in piety and service. And this is what Augustus has accomplished. Conquering everything in green is his doing. What he inherited was the yellow. Everything in green, different shades depending on the period, is his accomplishment. He is not the first one to do something like this. You've seen this map probably. This is Alexander the Great, who died at 32 and had already conquered a lot of land in the east. And his plan was really to add to it Africa and the west. So that's the task of the politician. I'm not saying, I'm using the word politician because I couldn't think of a better word to juxtapose with poet. It's a statesman, but it's essentially the politician who wants all the power, the absolute power. I wouldn't call this necessarily a strongman or a dictator, but somebody who wants to rule because he believes he has to rule. And for this, he needs all the power. Let's see now what the poet's task is. I'm going to resort to a formulation that has come to us from the commentary of Virgil's works by Servius, and this is 4th century. It's not the time of Virgil, but 4th century, and it's preserved in a 16th century edition. So Servius says Virgil's intention was twofold: to imitate Homer and to praise Augustus through his ancestors. Now that's interesting. Today we won't think this is a poet's task, right? To imitate and to praise. But Servius is very positively inclined in his commentary. So in Servius's understanding, this is not criticism at all. And let's first consider imitation of Homer in the Aeneid. I know until today many would agree with Servius that what the Aeneid does is steals or imitates or copies Homer, but I'd like to propose another approach that has been very alive during the recent century, I would say, and that's the approach of intertextuality, seeing Vergil in a dialogue with Homer rather than copying Homer. I think it is much closer to the truth to think of Vergil that way. Homer too was not original, right? Whoever Homer was, he used an existing folk tradition. Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare was, we know he used a lot of existing stories already. So one peculiarity of Vergil, though, is that he is a poeta doctus, so-called poeta doctus, and that means he's a learned poet. He knew everything about Homer. He had read all criticism of Homer, and there was a lot of criticism of Homer too. So when he writes, he has the full awareness of what he's doing. It is intentional. He is in a dialogue. 2 points here. The Iliad is the origin of the very idea of Aeneas surviving and starting a new race. And you might remember this. This is Poseidon's prediction in the 20th book of the Iliad when he saves Aeneid from Achilles, who is about to kill him, and pronounces the following vision. And now Aeneas will rule the men of Troy in power, his son's son, and the sons born in future years. So that's the prediction that has given birth to a whole mythology around the Trojans coming to the Italian peninsula and starting the Roman race. This is not an invention of Vergil. And Vergil, in the very first line of the Aeneid, obviously admits that he's in a dialogue with Homer because he says, my song is of war and a man. And you remember the Iliad is about the rage of Achilles and war, and the Odyssey is about a man, rage and man being the first words in the two epics. So this is something very important to keep in mind, the awareness of Vergil, what he is doing with Homer, to Homer, and with Homer. Now, I have created the list of similarities that some see as imitations, but again, they are not imitations, they are intertextual relationships. And those in red I think are more interesting, so I'm going to quickly go over them and see what we can extract from a comparison. So first, the heroes. Everybody says, oh, he's not at all like Achilles. Aeneas is not at all like Achilles or like Odysseus. Certainly he is not, but isn't this the whole point? Times have changed, and Virgil is writing from the 1st century, and more than 1,000 years before, when the Trojan War happened, the idea of a community and responsibility of leadership was completely different. Just remember Agamemnon and his whimsical behavior. So the main epithet for Aeneas, pious Aeneas, really means loyalty to the gods, to his country, and to his family. And he is in between the past, his father, and the future, his son, and all the predictions about the future generations and the Roman race. Then we have the idea of fate. Fate in Homer is sometimes questioned, but there is immediately an answer. For instance, Zeus is wondering whether to change a hero's fate. And then Juno comes and says, be careful because the gods are going to disobey you. You're not supposed to do it. So we as readers are left uncertain whether this is at all possible. It looks like if you're the main god, like Zeus, you can't afford any disbalance, so he never tries changing fate. Then divine interference. We have divine interference here, and it is Juno, but it is slightly different. It's more whimsical, more humanized. It's revenge. She seems weaker. Juno has to resort to the help of the Furies, the main Fury Alecto, to fulfill her plans. And in general, the point is she can change fate, but what she can do is postpone the fulfillment of Aeneas as a leader and a creator and leader of a future race. Homecoming. Odysseus is really returning home where he started from, and we have a very new concept here of a refugee looking for a new home. So that's again a different level of the dialogue between Homer and between Virgil and Homer. The idea of suffering and loss. There is lots of suffering, lots of killing, lots of gore of war in the Iliad and quite a lot in the Odyssey, but the focus is not on the suffering. In the Aeneid, all of a sudden the focus is on the suffering, on the price of success or fulfillment of fate. It's all about suffering and loss. We have the famous descent to Hades of Odysseus and of Aeneas, and these are very comparable, and they show different things again. Odysseus learns about his future. Aeneas learns about the future of his descendants. So again, as an individual, he is between the past and the future. He is not the powerful individual that Odysseus is, who has basically his life in his hands. He is an agent of his own life. Then people compare the shields. Again, the shield of Achilles, they're made by the same god, Hephaestus or Vulcan. They're both beautiful. The shield of Achilles talks about the city, shows the city at war and the city in peace. Is surrounded by the river Oceanus. It's kind of comprehensive idea of the universe. And here we are with the shield of Aeneas, which is very specific. It's the shield of the Romans. It shows the future. Aeneas is going to be protected by the certainty of the future. A lot could be said about the strong women in the Aeneid, which appear also in Homer, but they're goddesses there, right? The strongest woman in the Odyssey is, of course, Penelope, but she's strong in her own way with her special ruse, weaving and unweaving and keeping all these suitors together. She doesn't leave her house. This is where she spends 20 years. Here we have Dido and we have Camilla, so these are completely different types of women, and they probably correspond to some extent to the Roman matrons. We have a woman as the cause of war, Helen, and we have a woman as the cause of war, Lavinia. In the Aeneid, we have a woman as a prize in both cases. Again, Lavinia, totally objectified, not saying a word in the Aeneid, is juxtaposed to the slaves, the enslaved women in the Odyssey. So she's free, she's a princess, and yet she is, in a sense, very comparable with the slave women. The famous book 10 in the Iliad, the so-called Dolonean, marauding through the night, is juxtaposed by Vergil here with the marauding through the night by two young Trojans who want to be heroes, who have embraced the heroic model of the Odyssey, of the Iliad, but obviously they're not going to succeed. Times have changed, and like Dolon in the 10th book of the Odyssey, they're not prepared for this. In general, there is no cunning at all in the Aeneid, and cunning is so important both in the Iliad and in the Odyssey. As we know, it's a value to have metis, to be cunning, clever. It's Athena's major attribute. The goddess Athena is not here, and cunning too is missing, and it is clear that's not a Roman value. So we have more about sleep and dreams, the differences of the two, between the two books. Fathers and sons take the relationship between Odysseus and his father, Laertes, and compare it with the relationship of Aeneas and his father Anchises. Anchises is ruling, really, even from the underworld. So I'm going to stop here. We can talk about it if you have any questions, but everything that Vergil does is somehow in response and in dialogue, in juxtaposition of what people already know from Homer. Vergil expected his audience to know Homer. He did not hide the similarities, he emphasized them. So I just thought that I should show you a couple of pictures here that seem to be very indicative of the situation of Aeneas. And the first one is a Greek vase in which we have Aeneas escaping Troy, carrying his father on his back. And here we have a 17th century famous sculpture by Bernini with Aeneas again escaping. His son is not very visible behind, just a little, almost a baby. But here the bigger, the enlarged top of the sculpture should show you the determination on the face of Anchises, who is carrying the household gods. And then the Christ-like almost face of Aeneas carrying him. I chose this sculpture because it very clearly shows how heavy this burden is that Aeneas has to carry. It's not only the burden of his father, but it comes from his father mostly, although there is another prediction, of course, but it is his father's insistence that what he needs to do is to live a life that will allow the fulfillment of the future that will come 20 generations later. This is a huge burden, we have to admit. Who of us could live with the thought of our descendants 20 years from now, even, not to say 1,000 years. So that's really emphasized by Virgil, and we will see why. So the other thing that Servius said was that Virgil was trying to please Augustus, right? To praise Augustus. And indeed, the poem could be seen as an etiology of sorts, investigation of the cause, be it historical or mythical, of Rome. How did Rome come to be? How did the Roman race come into existence? So all this is a matter of fate. It could not be otherwise, according to the poem, read as propaganda. And because of this, the proleptic quality of the poem is very visible and important. It is the anticipation of this future event that has not taken place yet. Now, prophecies are proleptic, but what we have here is very unusual because Virgil actually is in the future. Virgil knows where the future is headed and now can shape Aeneas's fate and the fate of the Trojans and the Italian tribes in his poem, and the fate of Rome, and even the fate of the world, knowing that Augustus' ambition is actually conquering the world, bringing civilization to everybody. A little bit more on propaganda. Very early in the poem, in the 32nd line, we have this statement: to found the Roman race requires such great effort, and the emphasis on all the suffering and sacrifice this requires could be seen two ways, right? One way is, yeah, it's worth it. It's really hard work to establish the Roman race, the Roman Empire, but this is how good things happen. There is a shadow, of course, to this propaganda statement that says, well, is it worth it? Is all the suffering worth it? But we're not going to talk about it immediately. Jupiter tells Venus, his prediction is very important. It's kind of guaranteeing the future. On them, the Trojans, I set no boundaries of time and space. I've granted empire without end. So if you're Augustus in the 1st century, you really like this. You would really like these two lines. This is coming straight from the gods, from Jupiter. It could not be otherwise. Then Mercury, who tries to detain Aeneas from his, who is sent by Jupiter to make Aeneas leave Dido, says, if you want labor for your own fame, think of Ascanius' future, the hope of your heir Iulius. He is owed the rule of Italy and the soil of Rome. Owed the rule of Italy and the soil of Rome. So the way propaganda works here is entirely, it cannot be otherwise. It must be that way. This was what was fated. And that's why we are here. That's why the Roman Empire is what it is. Anchises speaks to Aeneid and shows him a vision of the future. Now turn your eyes, look at this race, your Romans. Here is Caesar with all of Julius' children who'll come under the sky's great axis. And here the man you hear so often promised to you, Augustus Caesar, born of gods, who'll bring a golden age to Latium, where Saturn lived, and push his empire past the Garments and Indians to lands beyond our stars, beyond sun's yearly path, where Atlas hoists the sky, turning the star-studded sphere on his shoulder. Even Caspian lands and the Black Sea dread this approach. They already fear the prophecies. 50 more lines predicting the greatness of Augustus follow. So that's enough reason, right, to think of the poem as mere propaganda. But there is so much more in the poem than the quotes I showed here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the historic and poetic ambivalence in the Aeneid. First, historically, the interesting question is what happened and why, right? And was it unavoidable or fated? And the vision of the future of Aeneas' descendants in Book 6, which excludes Creusa and Dido or settlement on Crete, although Anchises says that this is the cradle of the Teucer's race, or in Buthrotum, which is a little Troy created by Helenus, seems to point to a possibility. What happened might have been different. So Creusa might have been alive and going into exile with Aeneas. Aeneas could have stayed with Dido. Aeneas could have settled on Crete. Aeneas could have stayed in Buthrotum. All these examples of possibilities are there, of course, poetically to enhance the plot, but also they're meaningful. The fact that the episode with Dido is a kind of detour unpredicted by Helenus is very meaningful. It shows that things could develop differently. Then the ambivalence from a poetic perspective, what poetry doesn't ask what happened and why, but poetry asks us to imagine. What was it like? The end and the means of the fated. What was the end and what were the means? Juno caused lots of suffering and problems. Was it her doing? And then Vergil, as a poet, invented it or told it. Or was it Augustus's doing? Because Augustus has, at the end, to be the victorious one. And it's very interesting that we can feel that it was pretty terrible to go through all this, but we are not clear what the cause is and whether it is fated. What could have happened instead is another question poetry usually poses, and it is, what if Aeneas, as we see him in books 1 to 6, remained in Hades? He tells his father that he doesn't understand why the souls want to be reborn, why this awful longing for the light, he asks. That's very interesting. And after that, I'm going to show you a very famous image, which might kind of represent everything that I tried to convey so far. So we have a vase emerging here, and this vase supposedly is what's fated, what Augustus is about. It's the future. And then when we look carefully, of course, we see something else. We see the black two faces on both sides. So people see it differently. Some first would see the vase of propaganda, I would say, and others would first see the faces of ambiguity. But after we have seen both, the state our eyes and our perception is in allows us to see them almost simultaneously, and it's like a quick shift between the one and the other. This is where we are because of the ambivalence. But there is also something else that we should add to the ambivalence, and these are this is the ambiguity, the dream, mostly the dream ambiguity in the Aeneid. And we have Mercury appearing to Aeneas in his dream and urging him to leave Dido because females are a fickle thing, always prone to change. And it is dangerous to stay with a goddess that might be vengeful. So whether Aeneas had this dream or not, we can't say, but it looked like Mercury to him. And Could he stay? Yes, he could still stay, but then he would oppose fate and the gods. Then, in the entrance to Hades, where Aeneas goes in book 6, there is a mention of a giant dark-leaved elm spreading out its ancient branches. They say false dreams live on it, clinging under every leaf. This is the beginning of this journey in the underworld, and then the exit, which is very famous, reads like that. There are twin gates of sleep. One, they say, is made of horn and lets true visions pass through easily. Oh, sorry, true visions, not throw. It lets true visions pass through easily, apologies. The other gleams with complex work in ivory, but through it shades sent lying visions to the light. Anchises and the Sibyl brought Aeneas to this gate and sent him through. He hurried to the ships and joined his crew. So Aeneas leaves the underworld through the gate of lying visions, the ivory gate of lying visions. And that's the very middle of the book. And it has been discussed many times. How exactly should this be interpreted? There are many possibilities. It looks like the new Aeneas who emerges after that is very different from the old one. And we can never be sure whether it's the same Aeneas. We can never be sure whether he really left. So it is here, it is in the text, and regardless of the different interpretations, it is upsetting if we try to see one and the same Aeneas. So what happens with the ambivalence and the ambiguity, this blackness around the base of clear propaganda, clear idea of praising Augustus is gathering more and more darkness that we have to puzzle out. So what I propose for us is to try to see the Aeneid as a whole in which there are two juxtaposed powers. One is the assertive power of politics, of action, of history, of fate, of prediction. And the other is the questioning power of poetry that inquires about the human experience and asks, could it be otherwise? And it looks like both are in the book. Vergil, why is the propaganda there? It could be entirely for practical reasons, but if the propaganda was not there, it couldn't be questioned. Because if it is outside of the work, the questioning will be between two works. And here we have everything together and the whole complexity of it. So the Aeneid's very existence as a work of art seems to be justified by the questioning it does within itself, the inner questioning, not directed to another work. Because of the different readings, different possibilities the Aeneid offers, there are at least three directions of fragmentation throughout the reception of the poem, and they're very complex and rich, but I'm just going to outline them. One way of reading the Aeneid is the Augustan political reading. The focus is on the etiology and the prolepsis. And this reading uses the Aeneid to prove the necessity of the foundational violence in the name of a grand future. It's the ideological use of the poem, and the poem indeed has been used that way through the years. The Romans bring civilization all over the world, and therefore any colonial power that does this is doing the right thing, like the Romans. So that's one direction to go, foundational violence is necessary in the beginning. Like Octavian conquers first and is basically quite cruel in the conquering, and then rules in peace. The Pax Romana starts after lots of killing and cruelty. Then the other direction of reading that is very interesting too is the poetic reading, and it has a focus on the lyrical and the elegiac of the poem, on human loss, on suffering and death. And many poets, including quite a few contemporary poets, have offered very imaginative literary responses, especially to Book 4 and 6. I would briefly mention poets like Seamus Heaney, who even translated the whole Book 6 of the Aeneid, Rosanna Warren, Mark Strand, and many others. They see the Aeneid mainly as a work of elegiac tone, and this is very appealing because it's the human side, the human loss, that dominates this fragment of the reception. And of course, there is an exclusively ethical reading of the Aeneid as a morally unacceptable collaboration of the poet with the politician. This means to reject the Aeneid because the poet betrayed his task, his mission as a poet, and collaborated with the politician, praising him, creating propaganda. So here we are now with another writer, Hermann Broch, an Austrian writer who combines the political, the aesthetic, and the ethical in his lyrical novel, The Death of Virgil, on which he worked between 1936 and 1944, and it was published simultaneously in English translation and in German in 1945, the end of World War II. Who was Hermann Broch? He was born in Vienna in a prosperous family, a Jewish textile manufacturer. He converted to Catholicism in his 20s. He first worked as in the family factory for about 20 years, and he was a textile engineer. And in 27, he sold the factory and devoted his life to what he really wanted to do, studied mathematics, philosophy, and psychology. In between 1930 and 32, a trilogy called Sleepwalkers was published, and we offered a course on the Sleepwalkers recently, this fall actually, and a group of students had, two groups of students had the opportunity to experience the depth of a philosophical novel about a transitional period in the German Empire too, but also something that might apply to our times when something new is happening, something is gone, but the new has not come yet. So it's a very interesting literary approach to the time, starting 1888, which is several years after the establishing of the German Empire, and ending with the end of World War I. In 38, Broch already works on the third version of a work called Then Virgil's Homecoming. When he was arrested by the Nazis immediately the next day after the annexation of Austria on the 12th of March, he was released after 3 weeks, but it was clear if he stayed, he was going to share the fate of all Jewish intellectuals, Jews in general. And thanks to his friends' efforts, he managed to immigrate to Scotland, and from there, in October 38, to the United States. He lived in the United States between 1938 and 1951. During this time, and he dies in 51, During this time, he worked primarily on the Death of Virgil and on his theory of mass hysteria. This is a topic that he was extremely interested in, obviously because of the Nazis, because of Hitler, because of the Holocaust. This was a very appealing topic to him, and he had a lot to say on this. He also was very interested in human rights. He has written on this. He was, in addition, a co-author of a utopian book about an empire of democracy, if you will. It's called The City of Man, a Declaration on World Democracy. These are, I believe, 17 co-authors. He's writing on economics, and Thomas Mann and others are involved in this book. So you see his interest in parallel to his work on the Death of Virgil was in social psychology, a completely new subject in his time. So he is an Austrian, and interestingly, the German-speaking countries did not cherish Virgil particularly, unlike the rest of the world, and unlike the rest of Europe, especially. In the classical studies, I guess they mostly wrote to reject Virgil. They rejected Rome in favor of Hellas, but as Theodor Ziolkowski points out, Virgil was read by classicists without love and was mostly criticized for alleged plagiarism. In the 19th century, interestingly, the only great writer, great poet who was interested in Virgil and revered Virgil really was Friedrich Schiller. And people like Goethe, for instance, didn't have much interest in Virgil. And then 1930 comes, and Germany is the one that celebrated most enthusiastically the biennial of Virgil, which changed a lot because it was the general public now involved, not the classicists. There were lots of lectures, lots of public events, but the interest was mostly in the Eclogues and not in the Aeneid. And if there was any main tendency in this interest, one could say it was in Virgil's betweenness, between paganism and Christianity, and between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. This is a very peculiar position he had that intrigued deeply the public in 1930 and the 1930s. Broch's personal interest in Virgil is intellectual and poetic, I would say. Paradoxically, maybe one thing of interest was that there wasn't much biographical information about Virgil, and Broch used Donatus' biography of Virgil, which is the 4th century. It's based on an earlier one. And what intrigued Broch particularly was Virgil's close relationship with Augustus, again, the poet and the politician. That's what's intriguing Broch. And the other one is Virgil's wish, again, alleged wish that the Aeneid be destroyed. And interestingly, Augustus wanted to preserve it, again, according to the legend. And then the question is, why would a politician want to preserve a poem? Is it because it's propaganda? Perhaps a possibility, but there was a lot to inquire about and to reflect on. Another reason for Broch to undertake this is his interest in death as a defining event and concern of human experience. And this was very clear in Sleepwalkers. But here, death is a main topic. And finally, again, Virgil's betweenness and his sense of a new truth in preparation. There is a phrase that's repeated several times in the Death of Virgil, and on which Hannah Arendt builds 2 reviews, and which she uses in his 1963 book on revolution. So that's a famous piece of the Death of Virgil. No longer and not yet. The old ways are gone, the old value systems are gone, but the new ones are not here. And yet there is a feeling that they're close at hand. Besides these several points, Broch's own doubts about the role of art and the aesthetic in general, in which he is similar to Kierkegaard and he's either or, this Broch's doubts, especially at the end of a cultural epoch, when the old value system is falling apart, made him again dig deeper into Virgil's situation. To this we have to add, of course, Broch's Platonism, seeing morality as a total system and the universe as one, and very importantly, the history through which he lived, World War I and World War II, the devastation of World War I, the cruelty and the absurdity of World War II, the Holocaust, Hitler as a phenomenon, and the big question that Adorno asks is, art possible after Auschwitz? All this was on Broch's mind. And yet he had a hope, and he conveys the hope of some kind of new unity, or access to a unity that already existed, always existed. So the reimagined Vergil from the Death of Virgil is, I think, originating with this statement that we arrived at earlier. The Aeneid's existence as a work of art is justified by the questioning. If it didn't do the questioning, it wouldn't be justified, no matter how beautiful it is. But Broch's dying Vergil wishes to destroy the Aeneid. The Aeneid, he says in a dialogue, in a conversation with Augustus, the Aeneid, while possessing all the qualities of a finished work of art, is nevertheless unjustified. The poem stands there like an obstruction to perception. It is in my way. Perception is not just the matter for the individual, O Caesar. Perception is the concern of humanity. Perception here stands for awareness and understanding, and sometimes for knowledge. So while the Aeneid is questioning, Broch is creating a work that is questioning itself and makes Vergil, of course, question himself and his task as a poet and his fulfillment as a poet and the role of art in the face of distraction. So if the reason for art's ambivalence and ambiguity, Broch's Vergil believes that the reason for art's ambivalence and ambiguity is not knowing death, which makes sense, right? Death would resolve everything and there won't be a reason for ambivalence and ambiguity. So true art then strives to know death. But if art knew death, then there won't be a need of art. And that's a paradox that Broch is tackling in a very complex way through Vergil in his conversation with Caesar. So it's a paradox, and it's a book of beaming uncertainty, to quote the book itself. There is something about it that seems both true and wrong. Are we going to get rid of all art? And then what about this book, which is extremely beautiful, that questions itself and questions art? Big questions. So the book itself consists of 4 parts. One is the arrival. The other one is a kind of descent into delirious visions. The third one is called Earth, the Expectation. And this is primarily a dialogue with Augustus. The new knowledge all of a sudden is metaphysically abstracted by the Aeneid, so Virgil wants to destroy it, but at the end he detaches himself enough from the Aeneid in order to leave it behind. What is very interesting is the musicality here, the way the four waves of lyrical speech here develop. The first and the fourth one are framing it. The first one is the false homecoming. The last one is a mystical vision. It's the true homecoming. And I'm not going to dwell on a description of the book now, but just continue with our topic, the politician and the poet. So about 130 pages of the book is conversation between Augustus and Virgil. Augustus's perspective is we, the two of us, are the greatest. I'm the greatest politician and you're the greatest poet. And Virgil's perspective is not only his, but enhanced by communication with other voices of friends and a woman he has loved, Plautia, who is dead now. His perspective is he notices Augustus's greediness for absolute power. Augustus believes the poet also is greedy for absolute power and eternity. Virgil wishes to destroy his poem because it seems to him too that creating this kind of poem is a desire to exercise absolute power. And many writers have said that in the world of their creation, they are exercising absolute power. And then Virgil's perspective is really enhanced by very humane insights on love and freedom. And finally, as he is estranging himself from the Aeneid, its distraction or survival becomes immaterial. It's unnecessary to destroy the Aeneid in order to achieve this final deep knowledge of the whole. And so from fragmentation, we go into a completely new totality in the very last part of the book, which is a mystical vision of death as the completion of human existence. There is first the community with others, all time and space are one. Interestingly, regarding truth, the ivory goblet changes into a brown horn one. You see the analogy with the two gates of sleep. And there is a sense of a true homecoming. And then there is creation, and there is the new sense of creation actually as fragmentation. Be it political or poetic, it goes away from the oneness, from the union. That is the experience of the creation reversed. So from fragmentation, the soul really, whatever Virgil is at this point when dying, is going to the very beginning. It's the reverse creation to oneness, to nothingness. And I'll end here with a couple of thoughts on the book, descriptions of the book. So according to Theodore Ziolkowski, this book is a vehicle for Broch's meditations on the value of art before the horrors of human existence. I took the liberty to use William Saroyan's knife-like, flower-like, like nothing at all in the world, because I think it's very apt, although it has nothing to do with Broch, really. And to propose that in our times, not any longer and not yet, so many things have changed for us and nothing clear is coming yet. We don't know exactly where we're headed. It is worth to reflect on what's close at hand. And a book like this that offers two kinds of experience. One is you're going to be blown away by the language and taken into it and experience it emotionally. And once you have experienced this, you can think about it intellectually. But the first thing is something that's knife-like, flower-like, and then a meditation. So I'm going to stop here with acknowledgments to some of the authors I have used. There are many more, of course, but I'll stop here and see whether I could answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katia. I'm going to leave Katia spotlighted, so she'll still be the most prominent square on your screen. We have, let's see, 2 questions already in the queue and a third just arrived. The first question, Katia, comes from Ellen Eisen, who asks, please say a bit more about the connection of the epic poets Homer, Vergil, and then Dante as well.
Uh-huh. Well, again, many times there is a joke. What is Virgil's great work? Dante's Inferno. Those detractors of Virgil who see Dante as the big one and Homer as the big one and the middleman, Virgil, as unessential, of course, would enjoy this kind of joke. But I think what Dante did, Dante took Vergil and not Homer as a leader in this world for several reasons. Dante probably had not read Homer. And second, Vergil already had the fame of a poet who was aesthetically probably the master, the most accomplished one. And also, Vergil knew about death, about the underworld. Vergil was between paganism and Christianity. Vergil has written in the Eclogues, there is one particular eclogue that Christian authors have interpreted as a prophecy of the coming of Jesus, the little boy at the end of the 4th eclogue. So it looks like Dante would naturally pick Vergil as a guide, while Vergil is picking up Homer as a guide, as you saw. I just want to mention Derek Walcott has written a poem that very much deserves your attention called Homeros, and in it he picks Homer as a guide, and for the same reasons picks Homer as a guide, is in dialogue with Homer, is in an argument with Homer, and very, very interesting intertextual relationship similar to Dante and Vergil.
Thanks, Katia. Thanks for your question, Ellen. Next question comes from Aksa Ijaz, who says, beautifully informative talk, Katia. Thank you. Could you please talk a bit more about the importance of death as a motif in Broch's novel, and why Virgil's inability to address the question of death in his poetic career becomes a historically pertinent question for Broch? Thank you.
Okay, well, that's a great question. Thank you very much. Broch was a philosopher, poet, and a Platonist. All his philosophizing characters in Sleepwalkers and here are basically interested in the totality of human existence. And he always includes death because life to him doesn't make sense on its own. Life is what it is because we are mortal. And we know that mortality is a major question for basically every single work of literature that matters. But with Broch, the new thing that we see is he believes that there is a path to knowledge of death that doesn't necessarily go through literature, that literature with its ambiguity might be an abstraction, but he is aware that literature has no other way to talk about death. So I think he's practically pointing to a paradox that we cannot resolve by making death that important. And this whole fantasy about Vergil for his the last 18 hours of his life. That's, of course, a total fantasy, but it allows him to try to imagine knowledge about death, what it would be look like, what it would look like to know death. And it's between life and death. It's again not any longer alive, but not yet dead. And how can we learn from this state of betweenness? There are lots of insights that he's experiencing, but I don't think Broch would have said this is what death is. He entertains the possibility of expressing death through art, while at the same time doubting the power of art to give us this insight. That's really a huge paradox. I'm not sure if it answers entirely, but...
Thanks, Katia. Thank you, Aksa. And the next question comes from Robin Gaston. What is Broch's relationship to his Jewish heritage and the Hebrew scriptures? Did it influence his writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Broch, after his conversion to Catholicism, he had interests in mystical solutions to the new problems of civilization. He believed that, first of all, speaking of morality, that morality is not imposed by a religion as such, but it comes from the human irrational, and then it is rationalized. And he believed that the Catholic Church as an institution provided the necessary totality that values need, that morality needs. He even talks at length in Sleepwalkers and in his essays about Christianity falling into several branches, including, starting with Luther, of course, the Protestantism, and although he doesn't pay much attention to the Eastern Orthodoxy, he believes this also fragments the moral system of Europe. Now, I think he is not very influenced by his Jewish heritage, although he has created a character, again in Sleepwalkers, a group of Jewish characters, one of whom is particularly important because it's of interest to the main character who seems to be closer to Broch. And the emphasis there is on the law, right? On the Jewish law. That's his point. The emphasis is on the law as opposed to the emotional, irrational adherence to certain moral values. It would look like he's questioning the idea of a law sustaining ethics and giving preference to something that is more irrational, closer to what the Catholic Church did. Allegedly, later in his life, he was not such a he was never a devout Catholic, but he was not so determined that it was the Catholic Church that was the guarantor for total morality. Things changed a lot with the First World War and then the Second, obviously, but a very ambiguous relationship to his Jewish heritage, it looks like.
Thank you, Katia. And that about does it for time today. We have a new custom where I'm going to ask you all to unmute in just a moment so that you can applaud our speaker into your microphones.
Thank you. Very much.
Very much, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katia.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Katia. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Katia.
And thank you, Kendall, for having us.
Thank you, Katia.
Thanks, Katia.
Right.
Hip hip hooray.